what are the problems with the consumer price index? The first one is called substitution bias. Now, this is referring to the fact that the things that may be listed in the basket of goods might have really good substitutes. And so the price of some of those goods might go up, but we might simply be substituting for other goods that are cheaper. In which case, we're showing a higher consumer price index than we should, because the actual price of the goods we're consuming in that category are not as high as they're being reported. Another problem that we have with the consumer price index is what's in the basket of goods. What should go in there? Now, at some point in time, they decided to put a cell phone in. And they said, well, that's become a big item, so we'll put that in. And then we came out with the iPhone, and it started doing even more, and we started spending a lot of money on our cell phones, if you will. And so then they had to make a change for that. And so as time goes by, various things become obsolete and are replaced with other things, and we have to make sure that the basket of goods reflects those things. We need to be careful because today, many of the goods that we consume have no price. For example, Google search is free, Gmail is free. There are a bunch of things on the internet that we can use that are free services, yet have value, but we don't have a price for them. The result is they don't show up in the basket of goods. And finally, there's another big category that's a problem, and that is that we don't measure the changes in quality. So, for example, iPhone prices have been going down, and yet the quality's been going up. That's not taken into consideration. We're in fact getting more iPhone for less money. And that's also been true of our automobiles. Our automobiles have anti-lock braking, and they have seat belts. They have all kinds of new features. Well, that isn't taken into consideration in the cost. And so today we get a lot more automobile for not much more money. So now we have the GDP deflator, and we have the consumer price index. And these two statistics or indexes can both be used to estimate or calculate inflation over periods of time. They should be virtually the same, but they're not. They're very close though. Why are they not the same? Well, because one is measuring the entire economy and one is measuring only what consumers spend. And so there are some things that are not included in one that are included in the other, and so forth. I told you I would explain to you why the consumer price index is so valuable. So let's consider that. First, the consumer price index allows us to compare the change in prices over time. So we can look at the change in the price of automobiles or housing or whatever and adjust those for inflation. Another very important use of the consumer price index is it allows you to compare wages over time. Let's suppose that it's time for your annual review. I mean, we all go through that, right? And they sit down with you and they say, you did a great job. We think you're wonderful. In fact, we're going to give you a 2% pay increase. Now, your initial reaction might be, oh, that's nice. I'm going to make more money next year. But what they didn't tell you is that the inflation rate that year was 2.3%. So did you get a pay increase? Well, the answer is no. In fact, you suffered a pay cut, 0.3%. By not giving you at least a 2.3% pay increase, you have suffered from a pay decrease. Anything less than the inflation rate generated by the consumer price index means that you are out some money and your pay is being cut. Sometimes companies will give a raise, but it'll just be a one-time bonus and not a permanent raise. So they'll say, oh, we're going to give you 1% increase this year. And by the way, because of the consumer price index, we're going to give you another 1% to help cover that, but that's only for this year. So what does that mean? It means when the year is over, that 1% goes away. So now you're 1% further behind. And they might say, okay, now we're going to give you a 2% pay increase for the next year. Well, that 1% is gone. And if there were 2% inflation rates during those 2 years, you're now further behind. So you need the consumer price index so that you can determine how much of your potential raise is or an actual raise, and how much of it is just cost of living adjustment. Another important use for the consumer price index is nominal versus real interest rates. When we go to the bank, and the bank says, well, this mortgage is going to cost you 2.5%. It's a great rate. It is a great rate. Because if inflation is 2.1%, you basically are paying negative interest. And that's a pretty good deal. This brings up a question. Will a bank ever offer negative interest rates for depositors? That seems on its face kind of stupid. Why would anybody deposit money in a bank knowing that the bank is actually going to decrease the value of their savings account as time goes by? Well, economists have always said no bank will ever offer negative savings rates on money in their bank. It's just not going to happen. So it did happen. Several of the banks in Europe decided they wanted people to actually take money out of their bank accounts and spend it. They thought that if the consumers would withdraw the money from their savings accounts, then spend that money on consumption, that would help the economy grow. So they created negative interest rates on savings accounts. Well, they were right about one thing. The consumers did take their money out of the savings accounts. But did they spend it on consumption? The answer is no. All they did was move it to another form of savings. So they invested in the stock market. They put it in foreign banks and so forth. And so it didn't help the consumption at all, because as we know, consumption is highly sticky, meaning that changes and things that happen in the economy have very little impact on our levels of consumption. And so this gets back to, how do we calculate the inflation rate? Well, the consumer price index is another way of doing that. One of my favorite quotes when it comes to inflation is one by Yogi Berra. Now, Yogi Berra was a catcher in the professional baseball leagues, and he was highly quotable because he would say things like deja vu all over again. But one of the quotes that we have from him is this one: "A nickel ain't worth a dime anymore." Now, on the surface, that appears to be absurd, because a nickel is half of the value of a dime, and so a nickel would never be equal to a dime. But what Yogi Berra was saying is inflation has been eroding our incomes and our currency. Now, one way to look at how inflation has been affecting us is to look at movies. I remember my mother telling me that during the Great Depression, her parents would give her a quarter, and they would drop her off at the movie theaters, and then she would spend the entire day there, because for a quarter, you could watch 2 or 3 movies and have money for popcorn. So what's changed? Well, it's been inflation. And some of it, of course, has been increases in productivity that have driven prices down. But anyway, the movies are a lot more expensive now. So one of the things that's interesting to look at is a list of the top 10 movies of all time. We will find the following list, and I have it right here on the screen. Avengers Endgame at $2.7 billion. Avatar, the same. Titanic. Star Wars, The Force Awakens. The Avengers Infinity War. Jurassic World. The Lion King. The Avengers. Furious 7. And Avengers Age of Ultron. It looks like Disney's done really well with the Avengers, haven't they? However, if we now adjust, using the consumer price index, adjust the earnings of these films for inflation, we have a different list. And here's what the list looks like based on that. Number 1, Gone with the Wind, $3.7 billion. Then Avatar, then Titanic, then the original Star Wars, then the Avengers Endgame, The Sound of Music at number 6, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, The 10 Commandments, Dr. Zhivago, and Star Wars: The Force Awakens. It's a very different list. There are 2 or 3 movies that are on both, but by adjusting for inflation, we get a feel for what really was the top producing movie.